Well, you can call me an inflatable bouncy castle because I am pumped up for our guest this week. We have the Right Reverend Dean Pinter with us.
That's not
You've
correct.
just bishoped him. You've just
Bishoped
bishoped
him?
him. Yeah.
Okay, we just have the Reverend Doctor
Reverend Doctor.
Delicious?
Just Dean is fine.
Just Dean. I don't know. I'm not Anglican.
This is a program for upgrades. This is a program.
We are naming and claiming it over you, Dean.
I think that'd be a curse to be made a bishop. So,
Oh, fair enough. Well, hello everyone. Should we start again? Should I start that whole thing?
No, that's good. No, I keep it rolling.
Good.
Keep it rolling. Yeah.
All right. We are off to a good start today. We have the lovely Dean Pinter with us. For those of you who don't know, Dean was a teacher back in Eston of me and Tim Miller. And he taught us, well, lots of things. I would say New Testament and Revelation and a lot of classes. I don't even want to go through them all because I won't remember. And for those of you that are listening who know him, know that he is a very wise man and gentle and compassionate, and we are honored to have him as a guest and just sit at his feet and absorb all the wisdom he has to give.
No pressure, Dean. No pressure.
No pressure, but you better bring your A game. We don't let just anyone on here. So Dean, we usually like to start by asking you a question. Dean, in your life, what's one piece of advice that has really stuck with you that you would like to impart on us?
yeah, it's a. I don't know if it's advice or just dwell in this truth. And this comes actually from a fellow by the name of Dan Van Voorhis, who hosts a podcast called The Christian History Almanac. So it's a daily podcast, about 5 or 6 minutes every day. But he always ends the podcast the exact same way every single time. And I thought that crystallizes everything I'd like to dwell in day by day. And he says this at the end of every podcast. He says, the rumors of grace, forgiveness, and the redemption of all things are true. Everything's going to be okay. I just think, if I could live with that in mind, dwell in that truth, that's pretty good advice.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's a wonderful podcast, actually. So I don't listen to many podcasts besides yours.
Recommended listening. Listening. But Dean, why don't you, just for anyone who doesn't kind of know where you're at, where are you and kind of what are you doing where you're at?
Yeah, I'm just starting my 10th year as the rector of St. Aidan Anglican Church here in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, for international listeners. Before that, I taught in a number of schools, obviously, including Eston. Timothy and I, we studied together. We overlapped for one term as students in the Department of Theology and Religion up at Durham there. I'm a priest in the Anglican Church of Canada. All our family is all grown up now. All our kids are in their 20s, which is different from when Derek and Tim knew them. They were just little beans, but now they're all grown up and adulting well. So but this is our 10th year here. I'm in my mid 50s, but still very much connected to England. We were talking about that before the show. Still have a lot of affection and big fans of the English football team. I'm a Tottenham Hotspurs fan domestically, but internationally we're huge. Like we're where "Football's Coming Home" is a song that we hear pretty often in our.
Excellent. Well, sure to pass on the well wishes if we ever stumble across any of the footballers. Excellent.
For sure.
Well, yeah. Well, and just to say, Dean, you're helping us start in our next segment of 4 weeks, which will be in the Book of Acts, and today we are at your passage of choice, which we'll get into the passage first. And then I know during that time too, it'd be great to hear a little bit of what this passage brings for you as well.
So, do I read
Do you want
first?
me to read first?
Yeah, I'll read first, and then Dean, if you want to read second.
Sure.
And then we'll get into the nitty-gritties. This is a reading from Acts chapter 20, starting at verse 7. On the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul talked with them, intending to depart on the next day, and he prolonged his speech until midnight. There were many lamps in the upper room where they were gathered, and a young man named Eutychus, sitting at the window, sank into a deep sleep as Paul talked still longer. And being overcome by sleep, he fell down from the third story and was taken up dead. But Paul went down and bent over him, and taking him in his arms, said, "Do not be alarmed, for his life is in him." And when Paul had gone up and had broken bread and eaten, he conversed with them a long while until daybreak, and so departed. And they took the youth away alive, and were not a little comforted.
Should I read a second time?
Yeah.
On the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul talked with them, intending to depart on the next day, and he prolonged his speech until midnight. There were many lamps in the upper room where we were gathered, and a young man named Eutychus, sitting at the window, sank into a deep sleep as Paul talked still longer. And being overcome by sleep, he fell down from the third story and was taken up dead. But Paul went down and bent over him, and taking him in his arms, said, "Do not be alarmed, for his life is in him." And when Paul had gone up and had broken bread and eaten, he conversed with them a long while until daybreak, and so departed. And they took the youth away alive, and were not a little comforted.
Okay, Tim, I'll start with you, and we'll leave Dean to last. Was there a word or a phrase or question that jumped out to you in that passage?
Yeah, I think for me, both times the phrase that kind of jumped out for me was, "Do not be alarmed, for his life is in him." That's for me, that's kind of a real got my mind kind of thinking about a whole bunch of different things, which, I'd like to sit there for a bit.
Yeah.
How about yourself?
Yeah, that one jumped out to me, just because. Anyway, we won't get into discussion yet. I have a tendency, Dean, to in this part to just name all these questions and stuff and start talking and goes off. And also there were many lamps in the upper room. Like that seems like a weird kind of thing to put in the verse. And why is this? Why did Luke write this? Like why is this part of the Acts story? What does it have to do with the overall message of Acts? I mean, that's kind of a question we have every week, but this one just seems like a weird story to. Paul talks a lot, and a guy fell out of the window and died, but then he rose again. Dean, anything jumps out to you during this reading?
Yeah. Again, just how break bread frames the passage, and the word comfort, or comforted. Those again.
Excellent. Shall I start the clock?
Yeah, sure.
You're gonna get going anyways, Derek.
Yeah, we're not going to hold to this 20 minutes at all this week. Just a heads up. It's more of a guideline than anything. It's
The law.
It's like the
yeah,
Pirates Code.
it's so.
Well, Dean, do you want to? I was going to say, can we start with Dean? You were talking about kind of the kind of framework of being kind of set in that breaking bread. Do you want to start by kind of welcoming us into kind of that kind of train of thought? And
Yeah. I mean, as this is probably one of the first instances in Acts where we clearly see that this breaking bread, particularly in verse 7, is speaking. They were celebrating the Eucharist, and it is. And what do we remember and are called to remember in an intimate, very present way in every Eucharist? We're remembering the reality and the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And so in this passage where, I mean, it's a funny I think it's a funny passage. There's things about it that are funny. Like Acts is such a great narrative, and if you haven't read it all, you're missing so much. Like this is Luke having some fun, playing with some things here. I mean, this youth's name is Eutychus, which literally means lucky. And so he falls out of the window. Was it lucky that he fell out of the window? Maybe it was lucky that he had Paul there to revive him or resuscitate him. But this whole idea that in the breaking the bread we remember death and resurrection, and here Eutychus it dies and is raised, resuscitated to life. That Eucharist and Eutychus are both signaling what we remember as Christians, the fundamental realities of death and resurrection. I think that's an important framing, but it's a fun. Like I actually think when people first heard this read out loud, they kind of would have laughed. I remember Darlene and I were talking about this story once when I was writing about it, and she was like, she thought if there was a heading, it should be "It's happened to us all." No matter how great the teacher or preacher is, just that moment. But lucky for him, we have a God who lives, and we live out of realities of resurrection, which the Eucharist is all about. So So that framing of it, I think, is interesting as a part of the whole travel narrative of Paul returning to Jerusalem. And so those are, but it's just funny. I mean, it's like you should actually be laughing about and I think even the lamp thing that you were talking about, Derek, the many lamps. I mean, this is the point again in the narrative in Acts where the, if you're attentive, the pronouns switch from they, them, he, she, whatever, to we and us. Yeah. So Luke, who I think is the author, he's actually there, and these are some of the details he's remembering. He's remembering there are loads of lamps, and it's an upper window, and it's hot. Heat rises. I mean, it's been super hot here in Moose Jaw, I think on the island in the last little while, and up on the third story. It makes sense that he wants to sit by the window and get some air. It's just hot, and that's actually where the third story too. That's for British people. That's the second floor. This is this is where poor people lived. The richer people rented or had the rooms on the bottom floor, and the poor people lived in the top floors, where it was hot, where there wasn't running water. If there was running water, you had to carry things. The cooking, cleaning, all the facilities were less. So, but it's he's remembering vivid details, I guess, and it shows. Here's an eyewitness. I remembered details. There are lots of lamps in that, and
yeah. And it's like, I definitely know what I saw because there were a lot of lamps. It was very clear. Yeah, even though it was dark. Yeah, I know exactly what I saw.
Yeah. No,
I was reading some I don't know if they're commentaries, but articles or something on Eutychus last night, and they're like, lamps is symbolic because the light, and it mentions the darkness and that, and the sleeping, falling out the window. Let's go back to the 10 brides and how they were sleeping, and the bridegroom came and they missed it, so that's called that. And sometimes they just, the Bible is just what it is. Like, you can try or add a bunch of things that aren't necessarily there to it, but at the same point, not going deep in them, you can miss a lot of things that are right there on the surface, right?
This is those kind of vivid, this is these recollections of an eyewitness, though, just like in the Gospel of Mark, for example. Just a few weeks ago, we were preaching about the story of Jesus in the boat, and it says, it adds that little line, he was in the stern of the boat with his head on a pillow. And again, that's an eyewitness kind of thing that you remember when things happen. Or another instance in Mark at the feeding of the 5,000, they sat down on the green grass.
Yeah.
So again, it's recollection. I remember being in Derek's study because of the Lego. Whatever, like that. Like I was there, or I saw it, and that's it's just that little hook of personal connection.
Yeah. And I think as you say, what's really interesting is the narrative pronouns switch from the kind of the beginning of Acts to the end, and that kind of sense also too, I think of helping to re-engage that sense of what the Spirit of God is doing in the lives of the people. That isn't just the great, like, what you would have expected is if Paul stayed up the whole night giving this final great address, and then it went into the morning, you'd be thinking, so what did he say? What was so important that he waited until the very last minute to share with them, and it was so inspiring and so engaging that it actually carried them right through the night. And you're like, so what was that? And instead we end up with this story about the guy who fell out of the window and died, and then he comes back to life, and Paul just kind of carries on as if everything's kind of normal, and there's just I think there is this big beautiful disruption of what you expect the kind of theological narrative to be here, and yet in some ways is giving it a much kind of clearer sense of what I think for me kind of that kind of theological notion is, which is don't be alarmed, for there is life in him. And I was really struck because I was thinking about all the times that I don't trust sometimes, whether it's the witness or testimony of what people are saying God is doing in their life, because it doesn't necessarily fit the framework of where I think that testimony and that witness should be coming from or should be pointing to. And that really kind of kicked me. And I was just like, oh gosh, don't be alarmed when you find life in them. That's not the life that I was maybe expecting, or the life that I was looking for or hoping for, when actually the Spirit is showing and doing and a part of something so much bigger than what I previously imagined.
But I think even the whole idea of bread and Eucharist connects with the line that both of you, don't be alarmed, for life is in him. I mean, that's every time we eat that bread, drink that cup, the life is in us. It is in mysterious but true ways. We're not Gnostic. We eat things, we drink them, and it gives us life. That's important.
Love the do not worry. Just he fell out of a window. Like everyone's gonna freak out, and it kind of like I hear echoes of Jesus in here, right? Like when he's raising the dead and stuff. Like, don't worry, they get up and walk, or don't worry, they're alive and stuff. And it's just it's very interesting, that kind of faith. To do that.
It's interesting too. Just I don't know why I've never really picked up on it quite as much as I did today. But just this, there's all this language about down, deep, sleep, down, and then up, and it's dead, and then life. Like there's sort of this descent and ascent language. I mean, you particularly notice it. Just some of the prefixes to the different verbs in Greek. You hear this kata, 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 and then ana, 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 which is kata is down, 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 and ana is up, up, up. And again, that's that ascent and descent, or descent and ascent language, death, life.
But interesting. Just thinking about that, your first comment too about kind of where kind of the wealthy and the poor lived. And actually there's something that, like in kind of the Western mind, we think of descent as descent to hell or death, and ascent as to heaven and life. But actually the opposite is true in this, isn't it? Like the descent was down to, where the wealth and the power and the privilege was. And the ascent is that kind of calling back to the place where the poor and the weak and the marginalized were. And actually, that kind of sense of kind of where are we expecting to kind of see life and experience life, and where is that kind of calling of ministry in the church? Like in the Church of England right now, there's huge conversations about kind of, what do we actually see and believe about the poor in our midst? Is the Church of England simply just for middle class and upper class people, or is it actually that we believe that the church is for, and actually the church is not only impoverished, but actually, I guess even a malformation of what it should be if the poor are not at the center, and not at the center of the ministry we give to them, but actually of the embrace of them as the true, the true place of the kingdom and ministry and the life of God that we sometimes remove ourselves from. And
Oh, it's sort of the where is the bread? The bread's on the third floor with the poor. That place of dependence. The people who really understood that language of the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread. We those who understand dependence and weakness often are the ones who obviously see God's grace at work in the midst of weakness, God's power in weakness, most profoundly. But when you're not dependent and you don't think you're weak or you're self-sufficient, it's often difficult to notice your need and your true weakness. But yeah, I mean, working with the poor, I know in our parish, they don't have any trouble recognizing their complete dependence and weakness. And as Paul knew, that's often where we have the eyes to see the power of God at work through weakness.
Well, that I was just thinking of the Beatitudes last night, and that made me think of it. Like, I'm going to be preaching soon, and I want to do it on what does it mean to actually be blessed, and the blessed, blessed are the poor in spirit, the emptiness, right? The lacking, the need for something, or those who mourn. It's not blessed who has the most property or the most things. I heard that Eastern, like in Western, our parables are usually, the poor becoming rich, or, they're working their way up the ladder. And then the Eastern parables are usually based more about the rich being humbled and learning lessons and becoming down to earth. And I think, I wonder if we miss that sometimes because we're reading it with our Western eyes about how, what does it mean to be blessed, or what does it mean to be whatever. Like we're always trying to get more instead of losing more, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably something we've talked about before in some ways, but it is one of the the appropriate critiques of the church, isn't it? That to follow a homeless carpenter and somehow see that the more we have is somehow the kind of the signs of God's blessing, that we're doing the right thing, and always kind of neglecting or kind of finding those loopholes for where we say, yes, Jesus says the first shall be last and the last shall be first, and then we kind of think of all the things culturally where we feel that there is some sort of persecution or something against the moral power and authority of the church, and then we're like, oh, see, that's showing us where we're in kind of the back. But actually, the whole idea of kind of your daily, as you say, Dean, that kind of sense of your daily needs, the daily bread, and kind of what where is that place actually where we're at the kind of the depth and I guess that tangibility, which we see in broken bread, the tangibility of our humanity, which is in the experience of our bodies, and there's something about the way that God doesn't see the strength of that, or what kind of, I guess, we view as the strength of that as being that place of kind of testifying to God, but it's in the embrace of the weakness and the ministry in the ordinary, and in the nourishment of your needs, that actually, we had that this week in our lectionary readings, that it was, it was sort of from 2 Corinthians, isn't it, where it says, where Paul says that God says, my grace is sufficient for you, and in your weakness is strength, or is my strength, or is the perfection of my strength. And I was really, kind of struck with that as we.
Yeah. Derek, you were mentioning too about, what I mean. That's always a great first question. Why is this story there?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a marvelous story. Like, let's be honest. It's funny. It's interesting. It's life and death. It's sacramental. It's all these wonderful things. But it's sort of why it's there. And I often would ask that in the Book of Acts. Like, why is Luke names so many people who we never hear about, other than just a one-off name, just over and over again. He does that all the time, where he just, like, even just earlier in chapter 20, it names these traveling companions of Paul's as he's traveling, and some of them we've heard and know elsewhere in Scripture, but sometimes for others it's just like this is their one time. But I love this is the one time where Eutychus appears and his name occurs, and I always think it's so great that to have what little kid, I don't know about your daughter, but certainly my kids, when we used to tell stories to them when they were little, especially, they loved it when you'd kind of put them into the story. When you put their name, and there they were sitting on the hillside, just outside of on the hillside of Galilee, or there they were in the valley of Elah, and you put them in. And I just think that's such a powerful thing about the narrative in Acts is how many names occurred just there. And Eutychus, that's a slave name too. Like that was a very common slave name. But you get included in the story. Ordinary folks like you and me, we get included in the story. This marvelous story of salvation. We may never hear about Eutychus again, but Eutychus, for all those ordinary people who fall asleep during long sermons, they're in the
saint.
Yeah. Here's a critique for short sermons or long sermons. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you're in the story. Whether your name is Eutychus, or whether your name is Damaris, or Dionysius, or whatever. That you're in the story. What a cool thing to think that your name's. Luke name drops, but he name drops ordinary people.
Yeah. Yeah, I know one of the things me and Tim have brought up is making the church a place for people to be themselves, right? Like a safe place for them to be themselves. And when you were talking about name dropping and that, and the maybe not the most popular or whatever, like you have a place, that just brought that back to me. It's like you have a place and it should be here, and not to be the person that doesn't follow the window. But if you're the person that falls out of the window, you have a place here. You are welcome. Like you are whoever you are, whatever you do, whatever you, welcome. And
and comfort. Like again, for me, the word comfort also stood out.
Yeah.
It's such understatement. We're not a little comforted. Like it's saying, it's understatement of saying they were blown away. They were, wow, they were comforted. And that again, that verb, comfort, is just one of Luke's favorite verbs to comfort, or be comforted, or comfort. That it's interesting. The book of Acts never has the verb love in it. To love or love, like there's no agape language. There's in all of Acts, but there's lots of words like comfort.
Huh? I did not know that.
But it's one of his favorite words, comfort. Even just in the start of the chapter, it occurs twice, but it gets translated, as encouragement in verse 1, and then. And encouragement again in verse 2, but it's the same word in verses 1 and 2, chapter 20, as it is here in verse 12. It's comfort, encouragement. This is a comforting story. This is an encouraging story.
I find encouragement in Paul that he like we would assume Paul is doing all the right things and preaching the gospel and doing all these right things for God. And yet he's getting beat up and thrown into jail and preaching, and people are falling out of windows and all this kind of stuff. And you may not think things are going well, or you're getting the results that you anticipate or whatever, but you're still on the right path. You're still doing the right thing, doing the will, advancing the kingdom. It's just everything around you is the opposite of what you think.
Well, and it's interesting, if Luke's chronology kind of syncs up well enough with where we think Paul, when he wrote his letters, but he wrote his letter. Paul's letter wrote to 2 Corinthians was written right around the time of this story, and 2 Corinthians is just full of comfort language.
Yeah.
Even though he says, like just again from the Sunday lectionary last week, 2 Corinthians 12, but 2 Corinthians 11 is that long list of, if I boast, this is what I boast in, 3 times beaten with the rods, lashed with whips, shipwrecked, in danger on the road, in danger in the city, in danger, all that, but yet God comforts me. So it's interesting how the comfort language kind of coalesces in 2 Corinthians, and then also particularly in this part of the narrative in Acts when Luke is traveling with him. So it's almost like Luke, he's maybe, when he's traveling with Paul in this part of the journey, Paul's just talking about the comfort of the Lord a lot, and writing about it, and that's just a real key word for him on this part of the journey, that despite all the struggles and crises and pandemics and famines and whatever else, that there's comfort from the Lord.
We are not
So
a little comforted.
Yeah, not a little. Yeah.
Not a little.
Yeah.
Mucho
So
comfort.
maybe that. Yeah, so maybe that is. We are definitely past time. I could sit here for ages, but I think that I'd just like to. I think for me, that sense of, being communities that break bread. Where all people, the ordinary whose names get dropped, become those communities where we break bread. We're surprised at the places and not alarmed where life is, and be communities by which, through that celebration and through that fellowship, are by God's grace and mercy comforted. Then I think, the world would be a place certainly marked by the active work of the Spirit in the building of God's kingdom, and if we can have a laugh along the way, not then yeah, I'm all for it. So. Yeah. And Dean, would you do us the honor of saying a prayer for us as we close this morning?
Loving God, we thank you for your abiding presence with us in death and in life and in all the in-betweens. Thank you for being our comfort as we continue this day to take our rest by moving to sleep, or as we wake up. Lord, may we continue to feed on your daily bread. Sustain and nourish us all. Bless us with not a little comfort and much joy. In Christ's name, for his glory. Amen.
Amen.